want some sauce?
Scene 1, Apple, take 1.
So what I've got here is I've got some maple and I've got some walnut. And they've all been cut to about 1.25 inches or so thick. If I were to come over here and measure this, this is about 1.25 inches thick. And when you're making cutting boards, you do want them to be a little thick. You can get away with like 3/4 inch, but they have a tendency to twist and warp and stuff. So anything more than 1 inch is really better. Ideally, you'd want like 1.75 inches, 1.5 inches, 2 inch, something like that. Okay. So if we take this and we look at it, you'll see that we've got some lines coming down this way. Okay. Now, if we were making something this way, we'd say, oh, this is kind of quarter sawn, because this is like straight up and down for the most part. This would be quarter sawn, this would be flat sawn, this would be considered the end grain. Okay. And ideally, this is what we kind of want, is the end grain, because when the knife ends up hitting this, it ends up healing itself a lot better. So in order for us to do this in a way that is not going to end up making it really difficult down the line for us, we want to cut some pieces, and I have done that already. These are rough cut, okay, and these are like I said, about 1.25 inches. And what I want to do now is I want to run these through a planer, and I want these all to be the exact same size, unless I'm doing some other type of design, okay. Which you can do that just to make it look cool, which I might end up doing, okay. But we want these to all be nice and smooth. We want these to all be the same size. If we can arrange it, if we can make that happen, it's going to help us out. So this is probably a good time to talk a little bit about types of woods you want to use. This is Purple Heart and this is Padauk. And you kind of have to be careful. Sometimes you see these and you're like, man, these are really pretty. These are nice pieces of wood. I sure would like to use them. Some woods have toxic oils and stuff in them, and you don't really want to use it for something like a cutting board. Okay, so make sure you do some research on it to see if some of the wood actually does have poison resins or oils in it. Don't just go to some forum or something where these people say, oh, I built one out of it and it works just fine and I never got sick, because that's not evidence of it, right? Go somewhere where they actually tell you, hey, this is a list of all the woods, this is how toxic they are, all that other good stuff. Maple is almost always a safe bet, okay? When I'm stacking these together, I am looking at the grain pattern. Okay, with the walnut, I have this the same thickness here, so I don't really have too much of a choice of the direction of the walnut, right? It's going sideways. This is like a rift sawn. This is almost like a quarter sawn. The direction of expansion is going to be it's going to be parallel to the lines that you see of the grain. So this is going to expand this way when it comes in contact with moisture. Okay. This is going to expand this way. Same with this one. It's going to expand this way. This one is going to want to expand this way. But what I can do is I can take the pieces that are pretty much straight up and down here, which are really going to be the safest ones. Okay. And then we have the two that are closest to rift sawn. Okay. Okay. So now these will oppose one another. Okay, because I went ahead and I flipped that. And so we've got some that are going to be going this way. We got some that's going to be going this way. So these guys are going to end up going on the outside. I'm going to call that good for the pattern. And then now what I'm going to end up doing is we're going to glue this up. Make sure that when you glue this, you're using a wood glue that is food safe, right? And usually it'll say indirect food contact. Type Bond 2, Type Bond 3 works for that, okay? Just make sure it's non-toxic. Don't be using like epoxy and stuff, okay? So let's go ahead and glue this up. It's really important that you don't miss any area at all with the glue. If you want to use a roller, you could. wipe up the extra glue with a wet rag, and look for any pieces that have not really that are not really setting as flush as they should be. Now that this is glued up, I can go ahead and set it somewhere and let it set up. Typically, you're going to need at least a few hours before you can continue. Okay, so I went ahead and I let it set in the clamps for about 3 hours or so, which is really long enough. And then now I'm going to run this through the planer one more time and get everything even on both sides, because we're going to end up gluing these sides to one another in just a little bit. Now technically, if you wanted to, you could just cut this end, cut this in the middle, glue these together, cut this end obviously, and you would end up having your cutting board that would end up working actually if you wanted to stop there. Okay. Now I want end grain. I don't want like quarter sawn, which would work, but I want end grain. So you can do this a couple of ways. If you want to, you could run this through a bandsaw and cut off pieces. You could set up, you could run it through the table saw if you wanted to. I am going to be using my chop box. This is when we're going to determine exactly how thick that we want this to end up being. And I say we should just go with like an inch. I think an inch will be fine. Okay. Now each time that I end up using this, it's going to end up cutting a little bit more than that because of the thickness of the blade. So we are going to be losing some wood. Okay, but we'll be okay. After I have found where this blade is going to land to give me that 1 inch, I need to mark over here where it is, so that way each time I cut it, it's the same size. Okay. Another thing I can do is put a piece of wood here and make that almost like a guide. So I just slide it until it hits, cut it, slide it till it hits, cut it, and then that way it's always the exact same size. So we have this, and I'm going to continue cutting these until I'm completely out. Lining it up to that line. Last one I took to a bandsaw because if I try to do it the other way, I'd probably cut my hand off. So what we got now is a bunch of these. Okay, because this isn't bad. I'll probably end up putting a border on this. Okay, but let's go ahead and make this a little bit more interesting. We'll do just kind of like a strange little checker appearance on these just by turning these over. And because the walnut and the maple are not the exact same size, they won't match up perfectly, but that's okay. So I've got a large piece of aluminum foil. And I'm going to be using this to protect the CNC table here. My other bench has got a bunch of stuff on it I can't take off right now. Okay, so just like we did before, using the glue, make sure that we cover every part of this. Any leftover that you have, we'll put on the side right here. When we're putting these together, we want to do this a little bit more careful than we did the first one. We want to try to line this up as best as we can. We're going to be doing clamping from all directions here. So now we're going to have to do some fancy clamping. What I'll generally do is I'll take a one piece of wood that I know is flat and another, and I'll put it on the other side, something like this, and then I'll clamp these together. So we have that. Now we have to clamp this, the side of this down. So at this point I'm going to give this about an hour or so to set up, because I'm going to be able to use this to finish up the rest of the cutting board, because at that point I'll actually have something that is the width that I'm looking for. It'll be easier for me to clamp and everything like that, and I have a nice beginning. And I only have to wait about an hour. The glue will usually tell you you need to wait 24 hours and stuff, but generally this glue sets up pretty fast where you can still work with it if you give it an hour or two. 3 hours is better, but I'm just going to give this about an hour or so and it should be fine. Okay, so now that we've got all of this glued together, I'm going to run this through the planer again, flatten it out, and then from there we can decide if we're going to end up putting a border on here, which we probably will, maybe some maple or something. And then that border is going to also end up helping locking all of these things in place. So even if they want to expand, especially near the outside here, there's going to be something that's blocking it, which is that border. So let me run this through the planer again, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so I went ahead and I ran it through the planer, and when you're running it through the planer and grain up, you got to go through real slow because it grabs quite a bit. Okay, so now we've got some maple that I have milled to the same height, at least within probably like a 64th, so close enough for government work, as they say. And what we're going to do is we're going to make this our border. We can go ahead and give this a slight test here. It's always better to cut it a little long and then go back and check. We want this to be as square as we can get it. Let's take this slider over here and we start cranking this. Which will do a good job for the corners. Alright, so now it's out of the clamps, we can go ahead and take some 80 grit to this just to kind of flatten this out. So now that the 80 grit has been done and we've smoothed out any high spots or anything, we're going to switch over to 220. When you have sharp corners like this, it increases the chances of splintering. So if you're ever running your hands down it or something, there could be a splinter that goes in your hand. So generally you want to round these over. Now you can just use sandpaper to do that, or a router. Now that's the initial curve, and I got to tell you, I don't really like it. I want one that's a little bit deeper than that, so I'm going to end up swapping. That's a little bit better of a curve. Taking our 220 back to it. And then just by hand, I'm going to come in here on these corners just to knock them down a little bit. Make things look and feel a little bit better, because I don't want to be poked anytime when I'm using this. I want to reduce the chances of splintering. Before I put the butcher block oil on, there's a couple things I want to do to it still. I'm going to hit this with just straight water. This is going to show us what it's going to look like pretty much after the butcher block oil goes on. But one of the reasons why I want to do this is because I want the grain to raise so I can sand it again. And then I'll put the butcher block oil on. And I also end up having some feet for this that I need to put on, because if not, this is going to slide all over. So this has raised the grain, so now it almost feels like sandpaper. So we're going to go ahead and knock that down. One of the things that I like about this pattern is it looks like there's a line of maple that's going between these, which obviously that's not the case, but it's the illusion. Right? We're going to be putting some butcher block oil on this, and since this is the very first time this butcher block is going to end up get any oil, we have to make sure that it gets a lot of it, because this end grain is going to absorb oil like crazy. Okay, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 coats, 4 coats, whatever, on the first initial one here. So don't be afraid to let it pool up, because we definitely want this to be well seasoned. And we also need to make sure that we do the bottom of this too. Even though we're not going to use it, we need to make sure that that doesn't dry out, absorb oil, absorb moisture, lose moisture, things like that. So now that we've got that first coat in there, which it has drank it quite well. I mean, the rag has taken a little bit too, but this has really drank it. We're going to end up pouring even more. Okay. I've almost used half of this already, and it's brand new. I think we're getting at a point now where it's got a saturation level that it's going to be really hard for it to absorb anymore. Which is essentially, that's exactly what we want. We just want this to be so full of mineral oil that really it's not going to be able to accept any moisture, you know, during the time. If it can't absorb moisture, it's going to want to reject things like bacteria too. So I don't think this is going to absorb anymore. So at this point, I'm going to be wiping up the excess of the butcher block oil. And this rag that I've been using that's completely soaked in it, I can use this to put another coat on the bottom. I could throw this in a Ziploc bag, and I can use it in the future to put more mineral oil on. That way it's not wasted, and I know that the rag has already been completely saturated. I don't have to worry about using a new rag, and it ends up absorbing a bunch of the oil. But there you go, guys. That's essentially what it ends up looking like. And like I was mentioning before, I like how it looks like there's it's an illusion. It looks like there's a maple strip that's going straight up, but it isn't there. And I like that. That's kind of cool. But anyway, that's that. You can pretty much end up making almost any design that you want. You know, just always make sure that all of the connections that you make between wood and wood are always very flat. You know, make sure that you've got them planed, you got them joined or whatever, so that way there's no gaps in them. So that's the first thing. Second thing is make sure that you pay attention to what direction the grain is going, because that can end up creating a problem. Another thing is don't make the cutting board too thin. This is only about 1 inch, okay, maybe 1 1/8 inches thick, and that is as thin as I would want to make a cutting board. Ideally, you want to do like 1.5 inches. Once again, make sure you don't use any woods that have oils or resins in them that could be potentially poisonous, or for some people even allergens. Okay, it doesn't take a lot for somebody to get really sick if they have an allergy to something. And one more time, just to make sure, you cannot use vegetable oil. You cannot use olive oil. Okay, you can't use the mineral oil that you get at an auto shop or something. You can't use 3-in-1 oil. You can't use WD-40. I don't know why everybody thinks that you can just get away with using almost like any old type of thing, but anytime that you do a video on YouTube on how to clean something or how to treat something or how to build something, there's always going to be somebody that's saying, hey, can I use motor oil, or can I use... No, you can't. Okay, butcher block oil, just use that, call it good. Can I use plywood? No. Anyway, guys, that's that. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and until next time, I will talk to you later.